Greetings, friends. Eric Willits here, host and producer of the Intersection Podcast. Usually you just hear my voice. Today you get to see the face. But for the last 5 years, I've loved the journey that we've been on as the Telos Collective. Being a part of forming leaders at the intersection of gospel and culture has been a great joy for me. I've loved our speakers and our teachers, the conversation partners who've attended our annual intersection conferences. Really, it's all been amazing. Being a part of this community with you and with so many friends, just been great. Well, I would say probably the thing I've loved the most has been hosting the Intersection podcast with Bishop Todd. We've had so many great conversations. Being able to interview thought leaders and practitioners has really been inspiring to me. Hopefully it has been to you as well. Well, as we complete our intended 5-year cycle of the Telos Collective and our journey comes to a close, I've been thinking about the kind of conversations we've been able to have, especially on the podcast, and thinking, how can we keep those kinds of conversations going? And I thought, maybe the podcast doesn't need to come to a close. So in conversations with Bishop Todd and JR and kind of the Telos Collective team, I've decided to keep the Intersection podcast going. We're going to have the podcast live on past the life of the Telos Collective so that we can keep facilitating these deep and meaningful conversations at the intersection of gospel and culture. So now you all have been tuning in for these last 4 years of the podcast, and I'm super thankful. We've had some really great conversations and kind of some success as a podcast. I mean, we have nearly 35,000 people who have downloaded the Intersection podcast. That's just amazing to me. And so we want to keep that going. So the plan is that this spring, we will have season 5 of the Intersection podcast. We're kind of spinning off. We're going to do our own thing outside of the life of the Telos Collective. But stick to the heart of what we've always been about on the podcast, which is great conversations at the intersection of gospel and culture. I got some things cooking. We're planning some details. I might spice up the podcast a little bit for you. We might even be getting a new co-host. I'm having some conversations with folks. But the bottom line is I want to keep having these conversations and I want you to continue to participate in them. So my hope is you'll continue to tune in as we spin off and kind of launch the Intersection podcast on its own. I hope you'll continue to listen. I hope you continue to chime in, give input, help us know some of the conversations you hope that we could have here on the podcast. But there's some great things coming in the future. So I hope you'll continue to be a listener of the podcast. And I hope you'll continue to be encouraged by these conversations. I've been able to do this for 4 years. I can't wait for the next year, hopefully 4 more years of the Intersection podcast. So I'm excited that even if in just a little way, we'll be able to keep the heart of the Telos Collective going through the life of the Intersection podcast. So stay tuned for season 5 of the Intersection podcast coming this spring. Peace.